Well, hello once again, and welcome to Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. And as I always love to say, the unexpected is the fun part about it. And I just learned how unexpected this is. I told her I was going to do this. Our guest today is Suzanne Jean, who is on vacation in Maui. Can you believe it? Jeez. And we didn't get invited along. And neither did any of you. I think that this is something that we need to discuss in some way. But Suzanne, seriously, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here and that you took the time to do this on a vacation.
Oh, thank you, Michael. And only for you would I get off the beach.
Oh, listen, you couldn't
I'm
have
happy to be here.
You couldn't have taken the laptop down and done it from the beach?
No, there'd be too much surf.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Yeah, got to do what you got to do. Got to do what you got to do, right?
Right.
I think you're the first person that I at least recall who has talked to us from Hawaii. If there's been someone else, I don't recall it. But, well, I'm glad you're having a good vacation over there and you're in a wonderful place for it. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about you, kind of as I described. I would ask sort of the early Suzanne growing up, what it was like being a kid, or what anything like that you want to tell us so that we get to know you a little better.
Well, the early Suzanne growing up, it was pretty hyperactive, pretty busy girl, always moving. And it was quite interesting because I was living in Montreal. I'm from Canada, and that's on the east coast of Canada. And I wasn't getting a lot of sleep. And my doctor said, you have two choices. You have something called ADHD, and I'm going to give you two choices. You either go on medication or you take Tai Chi. And I went, no, not Tai Chi, because I had seen people doing this very slow exercise. And I was very hyper. So not wanting to go on medication, I agreed to go down and check it out. And so I went to a Tai Chi class and I hated it. It's that very slow movement. But this woman said to me, hey, after class, we all go to Chinatown and have a big feast. And it's only like $2.50 a person. Do you want to come? And I said, now we're talking. So I had some motivation to go back to Tai Chi. And I found it really did help me. It helped me relax my metabolism. And it was the first beginnings of being mindful. And fast forward, I came to Vancouver and I went to find a Tai Chi teacher because now this is my prescription. I met this Tai Chi teacher and he said, why are you doing Tai Chi? And I said, because it's good for me. It's good for my well-being. And he said, no, you need to come to karate. And I said, karate? I don't want to do karate. And he said, absolutely. You're born to do karate. He said, come on over. So I said, I'll come to one class. He was also a Tai Chi. He was a Tai Chi teacher, and he was just teaching Tai Chi to make money to do while he was doing his PhD. So I went to his karate class, and I walked out the door and bought my gi, and I have never stopped. And I just had my 70th birthday. So I've been doing martial arts since I was about 17.
When did you move? Go ahead.
I continue to do Tai Chi.
Good for you, stay loyal.
Yes.
When did you move to Vancouver?
Early 70s. So I moved to Vancouver and I'm in social services. So I have about 50, 60 years of community-based social service background. And I was working with at-risk youth. And I was noticing that we were criminalizing their behavior, that the caregivers, people working with these kids, couldn't deal with the aggression and the anger and some of those behaviors. And rather than learn how to deal with that conflict, they were just, putting them in jail. They were ending up, and then it's a vicious circle. So I began to become interested in how perhaps I could use martial arts and self-defense in a way to give those workers more a feeling of security around those kind of behaviors. And so I began to work doing that kind of de-escalation training, and it was quite successful. And I began to see how I could build confidence quite quickly through self-defense. So that was the first seeds of realizing that there is some real power here. Because with the dynamics of bullying and aggression, and any kind of aggression, it's fundamentally a study of power. And when you can teach self-defense and the pillars of the program as they evolved, you can see real substantial change in terms of, giving youth and children insights into their strengths and their unique qualities and their abilities to be safe. And so it kind of grew from there. I have written a book, and the first chapter of the book, there's a very interesting story, because I was teaching self-defense to women as well, and studying martial arts quite seriously. And I got a call one day, and it was from a woman, and she said, "Your name's Suzanne?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I heard on the street that you're okay." And I said, "Really?" I said,
"Good to know."
Yeah, I said, and she says, "I'm a sex trade worker, and we're in trouble. There's a serial killer, and 2 of my friends have been murdered, and we need self-defense." And this really took me aback, right? I was like, "What?" And she said, "Will you teach us?" And I said, "Well, I'll agree to meet with you and see if that would be viable. I have no idea at this point." And so she set up a meeting, and the meeting was at 2 a.m. at a restaurant. and I arrived, and there were 50 women showed up for the meeting in the middle of the night. And we chatted, and I had no idea if I have never done anything like this before. I had no idea, but I wanted to help them because they were so sincere. And I said, "Look, we'll give it a go." I said, "There's 3 conditions. You show up and you're not wasted on drugs and alcohol. You're in fairly good shape. You show up, and that you just give it 100%. You give it everything you have." So the woman, Rhonda, the woman who was organizing the whole thing, said, "I know the minister at the church, and I'm sure he'll let us practice there. And I think the classes should be 7:30 in the morning before we go to bed after work." So I was like, again, just like, okay. So mostly they could meet the condition of giving it everything, but they would come off their shifts there and it was amazing. And to see the change in them, to see them grow, to start to recognize the community and support each other, and realize, if someone felt that a car was unsafe to get into, they wouldn't do it. They started learning the moves, and it was a remarkable learning experience for me. I was so impressed with that.
It's at least good that they did it at a fairly decent hour in the morning before they went to bed. That's pretty cool. But 7:30 in the morning, better than 2 a.m. every day.
I'll say.
But by the same token, I can see what you're saying, that you were teaching them self-defense, and probably a lot of them, maybe most of them, felt somewhat defenseless right from the outset. And so you were instilling a lot of confidence in these women where they didn't have it before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so as my program's called Power. As I said, it is a study of power. And there's 4 pillars to the program. And the first pillar is attention. And that's around tuning into the here and now and really observing yourself, observing others, observing the environment around you. And, as they say, where your attention goes, your energy flows. So much of, for young people, so much of the world is in this little box, right? It's in social media, it's on telephones, it's gaming, it's on computers. And they're not looking outwards. They're not looking at each other in a way that's when I do these classes and we have discussions, they think it's rocket science. They could we do that again? That was really great. We're having a conversation. But if you think about their world, that kind of attention is not something that's common. It's not common. And part of that also, what I teach is being able to recognize allies and people that can support you in your life. The second pillar is really the heart and soul, and that's awareness. And that is building self-study, bringing people to recognize what they truly believe and feel and what they want, and then gaining the skills to be able to communicate it. So in order to for somebody to say no to getting into a car, right, that could be a threat to them, to their lives, they have to care about themselves.
Yeah.
They have to take that step where I do care about myself and I'm not going to take that chance. So having that awareness and that self-love, loving yourself, loving others, that piece is all about the self-awareness pillar. So this is not, you think of self-defense, you just think of the physical. And I take it to a whole different level. I take self-defense to a whole different level, a psychological level. The third pillar is avoidance, and that's all the things you do to stay safe. And again, it ties into attention, recognizing what those things are, and not safety just from a physical, but from emotional. So kids do learn street smarts and they learn that sort of thing, but they learn a little bit more about how to set boundaries for themselves, how to be emotionally safe. And in the awareness piece helps them to communicate that to others and set those boundaries with other people. And then the final one is the action piece. So that's where they have the skills to defend themselves physically and emotionally if they're bullied or they're threatened. And the action piece doesn't stop again with just the physical. It moves into being able to make good choices and good decisions for yourself. So all those 4 pillars they're interrelated, but they support a pretty good mindset. So the program, the classes themselves involve physical self-defense, discussions, self-awareness exercises, perception exercises, mindfulness, and physical, games. They're pretty well-rounded because it has to be fun. I'm not going to get children and youth doing this unless it's really fun.
You mentioned before about the fact that a lot of their behaviors over the years have become more criminalized and so on. Do you think that the behavior of children and younger people has actually grown worse, or relatively speaking, or that people perceive that it has, or is that really something that's happening, much less the fact that now we don't want to deal with it, we just send them off to jail?
Yeah, I think there's elements that really that make it a little more extreme, like the gang thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all want a sense of belonging. And if kids can't, in a really nurturing community and a healthy community, they're going to find a sense of belonging somewhere else. And a gang is a perfect place for it. And so, my job is to really try to teach them how to have that sense of community without needing to go to those places. And we have to talk to kids. We have to talk to our children. And sometimes I'm criticized, well, you're opening these cans of worms. You're talking about these subjects, sexual abuse and these subjects that we shouldn't be talking about, suicide. And I said, no, we need to talk about these things. And we need to talk about how we can feel different, like how we can feel better about ourselves. And so that's where they really do appreciate those discussions, because they'll say, oh, I didn't know anybody else felt like that. Because they're not texting it. They're you feel like that? Oh, that's how I feel. Right. Yeah. This is important to know that, or if I do this, it hurts. And what does that feel like? And why do you want to hurt somebody? Right?
That's so much that we're losing in the whole art of conversation. I've read articles about how we are, even as adults, forgetting the art of conversation, and we go way out on power trips and other things like that. We don't talk, we don't discuss feelings at all. And that doesn't mean that every other sentence has to be about how we feel, but we really should do a lot more conversing and interacting and true engaging than we tend to do these days. Mm-hmm.
And I'll just do simple lead-ins to that. Like I have a sheet of all these feelings, and I'll do what I call a pair and share, where I say, pick somebody you don't know and choose a feeling off of here that you felt recently, and tell that other person about when you felt it and why. And that's the exercise. And they love it because they're talking about themselves, right? And it's the lead-in for me, obviously, to go into anger and teaching them about anger. Which, again, leads into aggression and violence, and understanding that. And so you're right. It's a wonderful opportunity to I think for sure Zoom has brought us all together, and certainly through the terrible time of COVID. But having face-to-face, having kids face-to-face is where it needs to happen. And the physical self-defense obviously has to be face-to-face.
To be physical, right. But even with Zoom, there are a lot of opportunities to augment the process, although it's not quite the same as physically being there. But you can do a lot with Zoom that you certainly can't do with texting.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But it is, it's those groups that I can really build the awareness in.
Well, age-wise, you and I are pretty similar. I'm 3 years ahead of you, so not much. But we came up went to school in the same general era. So one of the things that it seems to me we are facing a lot more now is this whole issue of bullying. I don't remember even being a blind kid in school ever being a real victim of bullying. I think there was one time when one kid did, but I never really found that was an issue, and I never heard about it growing up. And although I wasn't in the big city, but still, I think I hear about it a lot more. Was your experience the same? And if so, why is it that it is so much more an issue, or why are we seeing so much more bullying today?
I think it's because we don't have healthy, self-confident kids who really know who they are. And, they can't describe their values. They're uncertain about their strengths. There's so much, I pick up so much fear and so much uncertainty in kids today. They don't believe the world is going to, the climate change and all of these different things are a major factor for them in terms of their security. And I think that out of that comes this easy place to just put down others to feel better, in any kinds of differences.
Yeah, because we don't have support systems like we used to. I remember growing up talking with other kids, And even more important, talking with my parents. And we talked about feelings. We talked about any issues that we felt. Sometimes we were a little reluctant, as kids are with parents, but still, our parents knew how to bring things out of us and really have those discussions. And there's so many reasons why it doesn't happen today. How do you get parents to deal with that with kids? Because as you said, the problem is all too often now we criminalize things, and parents haven't really learned that they need to deal with creating more self-confident kids. How do we deal with that?
Well, we've got to give them more time. I think that one of the things that, if you look at families and you look at all the commitments and two working parents and all the pressures, there's a lot of latchkey kids
there are.
that are just coming home and there's nobody there. And they need to be listened to. And often they don't even want you to solve anything. They just want you to listen, right? But if there's nobody there to listen, I'm very adamant that we have to address conflict and bullying in the schools, in the communities. And we have to say, well, my book, you have to say no. We have to take a stance. I mean, it is a World Health Organization major issue now. They've declared it. It is so prevalent compared to when you and I were young. And I think if you don't take a stand and you don't deal with it, then it's just going to continue. And I believe that it has to be everybody on the same page coming together, because it's so often people don't want to deal with conflict. And if you can teach people the steps to deal with conflict in a way that's really positive and has an amazing positive outcome, then they're more apt to try to do it the next time, right?
Right.
But if everybody just turns their head, I mean, there's another story in my book. It was in Canada, and this boy was being seriously bullied at school, and the teachers knew, the principals knew, the parents knew, and they did nothing. And his mom arrived at school in time to see him being murdered. And everybody went, right? But there was no intervention. And all of those people, including those boys that were bullying, needed to be part of something to make that different. Because a life was taken. And yeah, that's an extreme case, but it happens in so many ways. One of the things with the kids, I do this exercise, Michael, and it is the most amazing. I do it in the first session, and I divide the group into 3. And they have a big piece of paper and they answer the question, what is bullying? Why do kids bully? And what can be done about bullying? And the papers move from person to person, right? So all 3 groups get to answer all the questions, and then they choose somebody to report back. Well, this is the first time that the bully and the bullied are sitting side by side. And it's often the first time that the bully gets to see what other kids think of them. And they're described as weak, as having problems, right? Problems at home, as like, as an instructor, I can just tell which kids are which by the looks on their faces, because they've never seen them, thought that other kids saw them that way. So my daughter is an instructor in a middle elementary school. And she said, Mom, I really want you to come and do the program with me, because there's a kid in the program and he's a real bully and he's a problem, and they're saying he's going to ruin the class. I don't have the skills to deal with his behavior. So I'd love it if you did it with me. And I said, absolutely, I'll do it with you. So yeah, the principal and all the teachers had nothing but terrible things to say about this kid. I call him Johnny in the book. And we were doing this exercise. What is a bully? Why do people bully? What can you do about bullying? And this other kid, I was in the group with Johnny, and this other kid looked in and he said, you're a bully, don't Johnny? And I thought, oh, here we go. He's going to escalate. We're going to have a big scene now. And Johnny looked at him and he said, I know, but I don't want to be. And my heart just broke. And it was like, after this exercise, he made a 360 change. And
so
he was good. He was, because he just saw it. He saw how
no, I mean, but why did he bully in the first place?
Oh, he had, the usual. He was beaten at home, right? Yeah, that's how you solve problems. You just hit somebody. But he had never had positive attention. So he was a little Irish boy, and he happened to be so good at the techniques. So suddenly other kids were saying, oh, Johnny, you're really good at that. And I always do this demo thing, right? Demo, and everybody shows their stuff, and he'd show his stuff. And at the end, the principal came in to see a demonstration at the end of the program, and you should have seen that kid shine. And the principal was just like, I don't believe this, And I said, well, that's the power of awareness. Yeah. That's the power of awareness. That's holding it up and saying, this, I don't want to be this. I want to be something else. Help me be that. And for a lot of kids, it's shining the light. It's shining the light for them, right?
It literally is true that poor Johnny didn't know anything else until you had this class in this program. That's what he knew.
That's what he knew.
And so he was a bully.
And he was happy. And which is another thing they say about, and the kids say about bullies is, well, they're very unhappy. They're very angry. They're very unhappy. They just want to act tough. They just want to, they're just really weak. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm the tough guy. Yeah. So it's the power. It's the power of awareness. So it's changing. It's really, moving those topics through and then more and more, I've been experimenting with mindfulness, giving them some tools to calm their mind, self-regulation tools, because there's a lot of anxiety. And I think that also feeds into bullying. And it's that kind of non-specific general anxiety. Like you'd need to be a psychologist, I guess, to get to the bottom of it. But it's messy, right?
Yeah.
And it has a lot of weird sorts of characteristics in terms of behavior. But yeah, so I'm doing more of that, like, breathing and slowing it down, and they really like those exercises. They like the body scans, and the little guys will say, oh, could you do that thing, Suzanne, where you put us to sleep? I say, yeah, I can do that again. So this program is really eclectic. I mean, it's got all these elements, but as I said, it breaks very nicely into those 4 pillars of attention, awareness, avoidance, and action. And taking a real direct route to trying to put some strategies in place to avoid bullying. So in the book, in one of the chapters, I talk about how any organization can set up an anti-bullying program in the school and the steps to doing that. I have done this, and they can change the culture of their organization if they put the steps into place, and those steps involve the parents. They involve the teachers, they involve the students, the peers, they involve the bullies, and the administration. So it's a real program.
Do the kids oftentimes, as they become more aware, how do I put this, almost take charge and really deal with the bullies in a positive way and become
Absolutely.
part of the solution? Yeah.
You got it. It changes the culture. They decide what's not okay. And in a really positive way, they start to make that happen.
As you said,
what kind of world do you want to live in? You
yeah.
know, how do you want to feel?
Well, and as you said, it's all
How do you
about
want,
belonging.
yeah.
It's about belonging, and certainly if a lot of the kids say this is not good behavior, this is not acceptable, and convey that to the bullies or to the people who continue to behave that way, at some point they're going to recognize we're being left out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, you know, it's not difficult. It's not difficult to put this kind of thing in place, and having Fit for Defense, having the Power Ed program in there really takes care of the peer part, because you can do peer training. You can train those kids to be leaders very easily. I sometimes train them to be navigators, to take, you know, if kids, after they've done the program, they often, what happens is they'll start moving again, and they'll say, you know, I used to play soccer, or I used to dance, or I want to study a martial art. And it's really hard for them to walk through those doors without somebody helping them. So I will sometimes pay kids honorarius to be navigators and to go with those kids. And go to the first martial arts class, you know, figure out what a good place would be. Sometimes with the low income kids, we find funding and just open those doors and get them moving again. And again, as you say, that's connection back to the community. So that's priceless in terms of, you know, we're at a whole other level in terms of good citizens. Caring community. Yeah.
Can you give us I love stories. Can you give us a couple of stories about bullies who completely turned around and became very successful? And you gave one, but I'd love to hear, you know, more real success stories and why they're so important, and maybe how that helped other people.
Well, I see change often with the really at-risk kids, the angry kids, who kind of put that down. They in the course of this training, they'll put that aside, and they become the ones. They're the ones who are in foster care, you know, 13 placements. They're the ones that have those kind of histories that we would just go, oh, how did they even get here? How did they even survive? Right?
Yeah.
And I have one such girl who I've worked with who went through the program, and I trained her to be an instructor, and she was very out of control in her youth and hurt a lot of people and hurt herself, and was involved in, you know, addiction and the whole 9 yards, and came through it. And she just she just graduated with her degree in social work.
Wow.
And about a month ago, I got a call to provide a reference for her for a job. And I was so proud to do that. And it was like that, the whole continuum, the whole full circle, right? Because all she wanted to do at that point was to give back to other kids and help other kids who might have had a life like her. So
at some level, she must have wanted to succeed right from the outset, except just didn't know how to deal with that. And you showed the solution, or you showed her a way.
Mm-hmm. And it's not a straight line. Obviously,
No.
It's up and down, right? There's, you think you're through the woods, and then the next thing you know, there's something else. But the final outcome, and I know that she will just be so wonderful working with kids, and that's who she's going to work with. So that's a great story. And then there's the little stories. For some kids, it's so normalized to be bullied. They don't realize that they're being bullied. And that's one of the things in terms of the awareness. They realize what it is, you know, and what their rights are, what they should how they should be treated. And there was this one, I was doing an elementary school, and this little girl came to me and she says, I'm being bullied. And I said, oh, and she said, it's my brother. He's always hitting me. He pulls the chair out from under me and I fall, and he hits me and he slaps me and he pinches me and he knocks my books out of my hands when I'm walking to school. And she said, and I'm always scared. And he's bullying me. But she had gone to her parents and they just laughed and they normalized it. Oh, he's just a boy, right? He's just being a brother, right? And through the course of Power Ed, she goes, I'm being bullied. And I said, yep, you are. And what do you want to do about it? And she said, well, you talk about having a difficult conversation. She said, I want to have a difficult conversation. And I want to tell him what he's doing. And I want to tell him how I feel and that he has to stop. And so I worked with her. We wrote a script. We went through the steps. She practiced it several times, but I was a little worried that he would get really angry and hurt her. So they were in the cafeteria for the difficult conversation, and I was kind of just outside. You know, he couldn't see me, but I could hear it. And she went in there and she told him, and I thought, he's going to get super angry. He did get angry, but she continued to give him the message, I love you, you're my brother, but you can't hurt me anymore, and this is not okay. And I thought for sure that he was going to lose it, but he started to cry. And he started to cry, and he said, I am so sorry. And then she cried, and they both cried, and they hugged, and changed the game.
Yeah.
And that would have gone on probably into adulthood. That pain that she was carrying, not only physically, but mentally, right?
It's still all about having a conversation.
It's about having a conversation. And having the skills and having the support behind you. Like, she knew I was behind her too. Like, so that gave her that little bit of extra. And she got to practice, she got to be clear on what she wanted to say. So that's what I was saying, knowing what it is you believe, what it is you want. You have to know that before you can express it to somebody else, before you can have that conversation.
In the Power Ed,
really good tools. These are all really, really, I think, very important tools.
You've sort of talked about it a little bit, but why self-defense as part of the whole process? And is that a regular part of all the Power Ed programs?
Absolutely, because you can learn something in your body much faster than you can learn it in your head. So I can teach a boundary, a physical boundary, and then move that to a psychological, emotional boundary and have the kids get it faster from having that feeling. I can teach defense position and build more confidence in kids being able to step back and protect their vital points than I could in a month of Sundays talking about it, because they can feel what defense is. They can feel their strength when they hit a focus pad. They can feel how strong they are. They can let that out, that energy out, that pent-up anxiety. And I can move them into the parasympathetic nervous system so they start to let go of all that and get rid of the crazy head stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it is it's a direct route. And when we're talking adolescence, cognitive is not the best starting point, let me tell you. I mean, their brains aren't even developed for by the time until they're 26, 27. So yeah, I kind of short circuit it. I go into the body, into the strength, into the temple. And that's where it's fast. I can teach lessons fast. And I've just kind of I've just kind of put this together as I go along, right? I mean, I didn't have a manual. I wrote the manual, but trying stuff, seeing how it works, evolving it, and I'm still evolving it. As I said, I told you, I'm adding much more around self-regulation and mindfulness into the program.
Have you ever had a situation where you've gone through and done a lot of the teaching that you've done, and someone feels, now that I've learned to defend myself and so on, that my only way to deal with the bully is through strength and go off and deck them or something like that? Or do you find that people really get it and don't need to go that way?
No, it's not. It's
not acceptable, but I'm just curious if you ever found that happened.
Well, no, it's mastery over yourself is true power.
Right.
And if you can master yourself, you don't need to deck the person. There's no need. You can handle it so much. It just takes care of itself when you have that confidence and that strength over, your own emotion. It takes that response out of the mix. And I've never had it happen. And it's also, I teach, lots of schools, and it's something that teachers worry about. And I have never had anybody use the physical techniques outside of the classroom.
Even bullies.
Yeah, never. And my deal too is the instructors say, this is special stuff, and you use it wrong, no more. You want to learn this, you gotta follow the discipline. So there is a lot of that martial arts discipline that I bring in there, that they respect each other, they show that respect, they understand what hurting is and pain is. And
they learn to feel why all this is important. And I'm thinking especially of the bullies who catch on and realize what they've done or should do. And they, of course, as everyone does, but they especially, it seems to me, become all the better for it.
That's right. And it's always a new day. They can leave it behind. Like it's a new day. They're going to learn new things. This is it. This is how we become powerful, and how we become happy, and how we make good choices for ourselves and good decisions in our lives, and how we get the things that we want. And so, I have not had an incident of that.
And that is wonderful, and such testimony or testament to the success of the program by any standard, which is really great. And it is so unfortunate that we have to encounter so many bullies, and we live in a world where it's so hard, because we've got, all of our politicians who clearly demonstrate absolutely no respect for each other and are not acting as role models at all. It really makes it hard to view them as leaders, because they're certainly not leading by example, other than being jerks a lot of the time.
Yeah. And the thing about Power Ed as well is, and that power of awareness, is so many of our behaviors and our patterns and our habits, like they're really unconscious, right? They're learned. We learn to be a bully, but they're not. It's not. They're habits. And when you kind of shine the light, like with Johnny, that's the beginning of making a positive change. That's the beginning of change. And I think the main success of this program is that I'm super non-judgmental in that. Like we're not judging it. We're together, and we're where we're at. And there's not this, you need to be like this or that, it's just, let's just look at ourselves. Let's look at why we do things and how we do things, and let's be curious. And so when the light is shone, it's in that non-judgmental, and the positive change can happen.
Yeah. I think
It just frees it up. I don't know. It's the magic to me.
I think one of the biggest blessings that I got growing up was that my parents really encouraged a curious mind and encouraged me to be curious. And of course, for me, it was more of a challenge, I guess, in one sense, or more of a necessity, maybe is a better way to put it, because being blind, I didn't necessarily see things the way other kids did. But my parents really encouraged me to explore and ask questions. And as a blind person growing up, much before GPS and a lot of the technologies we had today, asking questions was the chief way that I would get information. And I wish more people would do that today. And one of the things I say about blindness, people are always thinking they are experts on blindness. And what I tell people all the time is the biggest problem with blind people or people who say they're experts about blindness is they've never tried it. The reality is there's a lot to learn. It's not something you're going to learn overnight, but
or understand.
But the reality is that you can learn to be a very curious person. You can learn to explore, and good teachers understand the value of exploring and talking and truly mentally growing to understand as you go along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really critical, and I think it's where that kind of development can happen. That personal development and growth is through that curiosity and that willingness to kind of, suspend judgment. And kids are so critical of themselves. I mean, it's just everything is like, oh, this is no good. This is no good. I can't. Yeah, you can.
Yeah. You may not be able to do it yet, or you may not know the right way to do it, but you can. And that's the biggest issue. When I was born, my parents were told to send me off to a home for handicapped children because no blind person could ever grow up to do anything in society. And my parents plain out and out disagreed with that. And that started the pathway that they and I went on. And I think
goodness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You have very special parents, because at that time, there wasn't an open-mindedness around any disabilities.
But it goes back to the basic, though, philosophy of whether it's disability or not. It still goes back to the basic philosophy of dealing with kids from a parent standpoint. It's harder today because there are so many things that can get a kid in jeopardy. And I don't mean that in a negative way or like bullying, but just in general. And it is so hard I think it's really hard to be a kid today because there's so many dangerous things that you have to deal with. And it's hard for your parents to deal with. But at the same time, we've got to let our kids explore and grow. And we have to figure out or learn ways to help them with doing that and allow them to grow and ask questions and maybe make mistakes and help them, but be part of their lives all the way around. And I know it's hard, especially with families where you have both parents earning incomes to support the family, but at some point you got to do some of that.
Yes, you do. And that's what I'm trying to do with my program. And the program is for all ages, children and mainstream youth. My particular niche is the more at-risk kids, and those kids don't have families. So I try to work with teaching them how to create a family of choice, right?
Right.
But yes, for sure, it's so important. And that being available. I mean, I was talking about these busy lives, right? Being around, just being available for your kids to talk to you. I mean, if you're not there, you're not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And bottom line is you chose to be parents, mostly. There are some who probably didn't expect it, but it did happen. And if you keep the child, there are all the responsibilities that go with it. And so at some point, you've got to be able to make the time available to talk with them and to interact with them and make them feel wanted. And I know that's a lot of what happens to so many kids. They just really feel they're not wanted because the parents aren't around, and maybe they don't know how to express that to the parents to get the parents to understand why they have to do things a little differently either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't feel important. They're not a priority.
And don't know how to say that.
Yeah. Don't know how to express it. But the thing, when I was talking about the anti-bullying strategy, when you get kind of everybody in the conversation, it's amazing how much people can bring to the table in terms of ideas, right? And commitment. And then nobody's feeling alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're actually doing something about it, and they're establishing some guidelines, and they're building an intervention. You have to, I said that before, you have to intervene. You can't be afraid of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And
conflict can be very important.
Yeah. Yeah. But having talked about all of these things, as I said, this program is super fun. Like, there's a lot of play in it. I add a lot of games and a lot of play. We do, they do slow motion fights. They're 10 feet away from each other, and they do these slow motion fights, and they do, all kinds of tag games and all kinds, building agility and strength, and they work with focus pads and fool noodles, and there's all kinds of things going on. So it is really fun.
What is a focus pad?
A focus pad is a hard, it's not that hard. It's a target that you use, that you hit.
Okay.
So you learn punches, but you actually get to smack something. So you get to feel to feel your strength.
Right.
You get to follow through, and you get to exhale and focus your technique on the focus pad.
Better that than on a person.
And it's a great feeling.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
We've talked about parents a lot and so on. What do you say to parents who say, well, I just don't have any time because we're both working all the time? We've talked about those double income parents, but what do you say to them?
Create some opportunities, create some special time, right? If you're both working, like make Saturday family time.
Yeah.
Where everybody, every week a different person gets to choose what you do, but you do something together every week, right? You have to make it happen.
You have to make it happen. And that's the real issue, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's got to be a priority to keep the family together. And I think that's also partly something that a lot of parents haven't learned. And, you said there's no manual for a lot of this. There isn't necessarily a great manual for being parents, or at least parents don't seem to want to read the manuals that might help them a lot, or haven't found them.
Yeah. So one of the manuals for parenting that I got, being a parent, is that the best form of discipline is natural consequences.
Yeah.
That if there's a punishment of some kind, it has to be a consequence of that particular behavior, and it has to be within a short time frame, and it has to make sense.
And it
right?
has to be consistent.
Yeah. And so that's with what I teach in terms of setting up interventions with bullying, that there's a natural consequence to things. And that the person that's been harmed and the person that's harming figure that out together.
Yeah, there you go.
and it's a natural consequence. So if you, if you ripped up my scribblers, are they still called scribblers?
I don't know. If you punched a hole in my mat.
Yeah. If you broke my earbuds.
Yeah. Then there has to be a consequence. And
yeah, you're gonna save up your money and buy me some new earbuds. And say sorry.
Right. And that saying sorry is a significant part of it. It isn't just replacing the earbuds. That's really right. Being sorry. 21 and a half years ago, I worked in the World Trade Center and escaped. And for all the time since then, I have talked a lot about not being really afraid. And there were reasons I wasn't afraid, but the biggest reason was that I had created a mindset by learning a lot of things, like what to do in an emergency in the World Trade Center. Also, having at that time worked with 5 guide dogs, I learned a lot of the same kinds of concepts that we're talking about here. There's a consequence for bad behavior. And it's not just when the dog behaves badly, but if I don't handle things in the right way, then I have to make amends and deal with it too, because we as a team have to respect each other. And make no mistake about it, It is a 2-creature team, both of whom have feelings and both of whom might sense when the other does something that isn't supposed to be done, and you do have to fix it. Wow. But during the pandemic, I've realized that we don't talk about how to control fear or anything like that. So we're actually writing a new book called A Guide Dog's Guide to Being Brave. And the idea is to teach people also about the fact that fear is not something that, as I put it, needs to blind you. You can use it as a very positive, powerful thing. There's a lot of physiological, natural reactions, but you can learn to use fear in a very positive way. And that's in part the kinds of things you're saying as well.
Absolutely. It is very much the same. And when you're doing physical techniques together, and you're practicing those things, you come face to face with, your own protection. And it's an interesting thing to believe in yourself. You have to trust yourself. You have to trust yourself, and you had to trust your dog as well, right? And it definitely, the fight or flight response is in that limbic brain. And it has to, in order to come out of that and be able to think, move, breathe, function. These are the skills that you're building.
But it is a two-way street. So the dog has to trust me as well. The purpose of the dog is to make sure that we walk safely, not to know where to go and how to get there. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but the dog has to trust me as well. And one of the things that I have said many times is, while dogs love unconditionally, they don't trust unconditionally. But the difference between dogs, or most dogs, unless they're really abused, but the difference basically between dogs and people is dogs are at least open to trust, and they're at least open to trying to develop a trusting relationship. And we've been taught in so many ways not to trust.
To be fearful.
Yeah, to be fearful.
Mm-hmm. And when you were coming out of the trade center, were you confident that you were going to make it?
I was confident I was going to make it, but at the same time, I kept an ear open, listening for the first sounds of the building groaning or something like that. So I stayed observant. But what happened for us was that the airplane struck 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. So neither I nor anyone else in my office or around me, or as we were going down the stairs, any of the people near me on the stairs knew what had happened. We figured out an airplane must have hit the building because we smelled in the stairwell the fumes from burning jet fuel. But we didn't really think, well, most of us didn't really think that we would perish. There were a couple times that some people started to panic, and we worked on that. All of us knew we had to keep everyone focused and going down the stairs, and we did that. And one of the people who at one point panicked was my colleague, David Frank, who was in our office that day from our corporate office in California because he was going to be talking about pricing. We were doing sales seminars for 50 people. They hadn't arrived yet, but David was there because he was responsible for a lot of the distribution and reseller pricing. And David on the 50th floor said, Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here. And I just snapped at him very deliberately. David, stop it. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you. And what David then did was he said, I want to walk a floor below you and shout up to you what I see on the stairs, because I got to take my mind off of thinking about what might happen. And he did. And he did that all the way down the stairs. Did I need him to do it? I didn't need him to do it. But what
he needed to do it.
He needed to do it. But you know what was even better about it was that he became a beacon for anyone within the sound of his voice. Mike, I'm on the 44th floor. This is where the Port Authority cafeteria is, going on down, not stopping. And so anyone who heard him knew there was someone on the stairs who was okay. Now, did David think about that going down the stairs? I've never heard him say that he did, but still he had to keep thousands of people focused just by his shouting as we went down the stairs, which I think is incredibly cool, because he needed to do it for himself, and it turns out helped so many other people along the way as well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wonderful story.
It is one of those things that doesn't get talked about much, but it did happen. But for me, I didn't worry about it. And as I would tell people now, one of our biggest problems in the world is we worry about so many things rather than just worrying about what we can control. If we stop worrying about all the things we can control and just worry about what we can, we would be much less stressed and much better off.
And that's why I'm working hard to build confident, healthy kids. Because we can control that. We can give them those skills. We can give them the ability to make choices and to feel strong and to be and to deal with their fears. And they have a lot of fears, like I was saying, they're pretty discouraged.
Yeah.
And
adults aren't helping.
And when I first started working in the field, kids, this kind of kids, the at-risk kids, they were much more scrappy. They had more energy. They were, they had more resilience, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And now there's this sense of defeat. They're depressed. I had a recent class, and we were talking about anger and triggers. What pisses you off? What makes you angry? What makes you go from 0 to 10 in terms of a trigger? And all 10 of them, there's 10 of them in the group, and they were going, oh, nothing bothers me. Nothing makes me mad. And oh no, I don't have any triggers. And we went around the group, and there was this one guy who was an athlete. He was a rugby player. And I says, come on, man, you're on the field and someone disses you. You don't get pissed off like in the sport. No, I expect that. That's just part of the game. So we went all around the group, and in this program, staff bring their dogs to work, and the kids love the dogs, and the dogs come in the classroom all the time, and they love the dogs. So we got back to me. And I said, okay, that's amazing. None of you have any triggers. So it's like perfectly okay for someone to kick a dog. And they just went ballistic. They were like, no, you can't kick a dog. What did a dog ever do to you? And blah, blah, and and they were, all 10 of them were chirping away. They were like, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I think you have a trigger. And then some of them took that, and they said, and it's the same with people. Like, it's not okay to diss people. It's not okay to just just put them down for no reason. And suddenly this whole discussion was happening with this. But prior to me provoking them, it was like, no, nah, everything's cool, man. Everything's cool. Everything's cool.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. You just aren't ready to admit it yet. You're just not ready to acknowledge it. But it's to use the same terminology, sometimes a challenge, but you found the trigger.
Yes, I certainly did.
Which is great.
Which is really kind of funny. It's when we're Anyway, that's a cute story. That happened very recently.
What do you do when you're not doing power ed and teaching and so on?
I worked in social services for many years. I ran a couple of agencies, a mental health agency and an addiction agency. I built them from scratch and ran them. I then went on to work in quality assurance, which is kind of seeing that organizations maintain a really high level standards around service delivery and business standards in social services.
But what do you do today to relax, to get away from all of this, other than taking a 2-week trip to Hawaii?
I continue to do martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on my 3rd degree black belt that I'd like to achieve this year. Still do Tai Chi. I do yoga. I said before, I'm very hyper. I have a lot of energy. I wrote my book, and so I've been promoting the book. I've been teaching, developing instructors. So my program is it's a train the trainer. So I train instructors to run the program. So I've been doing lots of that. I have some grandbabies. I have 3 grandkids.
There you go.
And they are joy, a total joy. I'm loving that. And yeah, I think life is good. Life is great.
And that's the way it should be. You know, you can always find negative things, but you can always find positive things. And there's no reason to consider life in a negative way. And it's too much of an adventure not to want to be part of it.
And like you said, Michael, so much to be curious about, even ourselves, learning about ourselves still, right? There's so much. It's just, no 2 days are ever the same.
Which is great.
Yeah. So.
Well, this has been fun, and we need to let you go back to your vacation. And remember, I told you we might go more than an hour. We have now gone 67 minutes. So we're doing well. We could probably keep going, and you're very generous and kind with your time.
Well, it's wonderful talking to you. You're amazing.
If people want to reach out to you, learn more about the program or whatever, how do they do that?
They can go to my website. It's fitfordefense.com, and it's fit with a 4, the 4 pillars, and defense is spelt with an S. So it's fitfordefense.com, and they can go on the website and learn all about it. Reach out to me. And if anybody is interested in starting an anti-bullying program, I'd be happy to guide them in that process.
I need to have you have a conversation with my cat. Oh, she's a wonderful kitty. She likes to get petted while she eats. And I mean, literally, she won't eat unless I'm in there petting her, and she yells at me until I come in there and pet her while she eats. And she'll wake me up during the night. I've mostly got a little bit of a détente with her. She can only do that once during the night. And occasionally she tries to do it more than once. And I'll wake up enough to say, we did it once. But
well, a very assertive cat.
She's a cutie and wouldn't have it any other way. It's great to have a cat that's engaged. And Alamo, who is my 8th guide dog, and she get along. So that works out well.
That's wonderful.
But I want to thank... Oh, go ahead.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, I want to thank you again. And I'd like to thank you for listening. Please give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to us. We really appreciate those ratings. And also feel free to give us comments. You can reach out to me via email by emailing Michael H.I. at accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com. And Accessibe is a company that makes products that help make websites more usable for a lot of different kinds of persons with disabilities. You can also go to our podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. But wherever you are, please give us a rating, a 5-star rating. We always love those. And also your comments. And Suzanne, for you or anyone listening, if you know of anyone else who we ought to have as a guest, I would sure appreciate you letting us know and giving us an introduction. We're always looking for people who want to come on and tell their stories like you, Suzanne, did today. So hopefully you might think of other folks. But one last time, again, thank you very much for being with us and giving us all your time today.
Back to the beach.
Back to the beach.